Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of What Makes You Click. My name's Daniel Mills, and I'm really pleased today that I'm actually going to catch up with somebody that I've never really had a proper chat with, which is quite unusual. Most of these podcasts have been people that I've known for quite a while, and they've just been catch-ups. Hal is somebody that I've known of for a long time, and I've been a great fan of his work. And I dropped him an email a few weeks ago and said, I'd really like to chat to you. And he came back straight away and said, yeah, why not? Let's chat. Hal Herzog is a psychologist. He's published hundreds of papers. He's an anthrozoologist as well. He has an interest in snakes. And also, especially, as I say, human-animal interactions. And the thing that really brought him to my attention was he's that healthy skeptic on the benefits of pets to humans. And, you know, again, I think, was it the last podcast I did with Sandra McCune, who worked for Waltham. Waltham, I know, really loved you, you know, loved your comments that you would you were that healthy skeptic, because I sometimes felt bad about giving them bad news. And then I started to hear about you, and I was thinking, well, I'm actually quite polite, quite modest by comparison. So he's also written the book, Some We Love, Some We Hate, Some We Eat. And I dug this out for to delve into again. And the other thing about Hal is he's a brilliant writer. Again, I'm so lucky with so many of the people that I chat to that they are, you know, such good writers and such an easy read. And in fact, my wife saw me delving into this week, and she said, well, that looks interesting. She's going to read it. And there can't be too many people who get a quote out of Steven Pinker on the cover of their book. It's a fascinating, thoughtful, and thoroughly enjoyable exploration of a major dimension of human experience, from Steven Pinker, no less. So with no further delay, hi, Hal, it's lovely to see you.
Well, thanks so much for having me on the podcast.
Not at all. And as I said, I'm not sure where we're going to go. I guess, well, let's start at the beginning. Actually, and let's start with this book, because I love the story that you tell in the beginning of this about how you ended up thinking about anthrozoology. And basically somebody accused you of feeding kittens to your son's snake. Yeah.
In fact, you know, the original title of my book was "Feeding Kittens to Boa Constrictors." When I got a literary agent and then an editor, both of them said, like, no, we will not publish a book with that title, "Feeding Kittens to Boa Constrictors." But that did snag the interest of a literary agent.
It's good. Yeah. I mean, Some We Love, Some We Hate, Some We Eat is a great title as well. But do you want to just tell the story? Maybe there's a more embellished version than's in the book about, you know, for people who don't know the story, and this will persuade them then to perhaps go out and read the book, because it is a great book, and it's all about the sort of ethical ambiguities and that we have in our relationships with animals.
Let me mention really quickly. I'll just mention this once, that there's actually a new edition of the book coming out next month. Ooh. And so it's, you know, version 2. And, you know, in all honesty, the message and the stories remain the same, but it's updated in terms of some recent things. So, for example, you know, animal research in the era of COVID. More recent work on the pet effect on human-animal interaction, you know, a bunch of stuff like that. But if you've already read the book, yeah.
Well, get the new edition for Christmas.
Don't read it again. But you know, if you got a friend you want to give it to, give them the new edition. Okay. Well, how did you know come up with the idea of feeding kittens to boa constrictors? I was working with Gordon Burkhardt in his reptile ethology lab at University of Tennessee, and what my research area at that time was not anthrozoology so much as it was I had developed a personality test for snakes. I developed the first snake personality test, and it was you know, we tested. It was easy to give the test, and we had tested that year literally thousands of snakes. And by the way, my personality test involved how many times they would strike my finger in a standardized trial. So I've been bitten by snakes probably more than anyone else in human history.
And tens
of thousands of snakes. I still have all my fingers, yes. But a guy called the lab one time, and he said, I just happened to answer the phone. He said that he and his wife had these 2 adult boa constrictors for about 10 years, and in their living room. I went over to their house and saw them. Actually, it was part of their living room furniture, this giant boa constrictor cage. And they had woken up one morning and they found, I don't know, 20 or 30 baby boa constrictors and unexpected boa constrictors in their house. And they had no idea how to treat baby snakes or what to do with these snakes. And I didn't either, but I did know a reptile veterinarian at the University of Tennessee Hospital, and I referred him to them. And then he said, "Would you like one of the snakes?" And I said, "Sure." My son was, I think, gosh, he was about 8 or 9 at the time. I thought, yeah. And I collected snakes as a kid, which is why I wound up studying them. And so we wound up with this baby boa constrictor named Sam that was about this long. It was a wonderful little pet. But he did have to eat, and we fed him what people typically feed boa constrictors, which we feed them mice. And I would go to the local pet shop and I would buy mice, and then we would feed, like once a week, we'd feed one to Sam. Well, to Sam, and I got this phone call one day from a friend of mine who's an animal rights activist, and she said, "Hal, one of my friends told me that you were stopping at the animal shelter, the Jackson County Animal Shelter, and that you were getting kittens to feed to your boa constrictor." And I thought, no way, Sam, he's only this long, how can he eat a kitten? And I was just horrified at the idea. I've had pet cats. I have a pet cat now. I was horrified by that idea, but it was just rattling around in my head, like, I don't know. Sometimes you get crazy thoughts in the middle of the night. Like, would it be okay to feed kittens to boa constrictors? I started sort of doing the math in my head. Like, let's say you obviously wouldn't want to feed live kittens to boa constrictors, but the number at that time, there were probably about roughly 10 million cats killed every year in American animal shelters.
That is the UK population of cats.
Oh, that's about 10 million.
Yeah.
That's about how many. And there was a total at the time of about 25 million dogs and cats killed in animal shelters. So I figured, probably 10 million of them are cats. It's like, wouldn't it be okay instead of raising mice just to be fed to boa constrictors? Why not stop by your local animal shelter and get the carcasses of these euthanized cats? And so I thought, and then I also did the math. I also started thinking about, all right, what's more ethical to have as a pet, a cat or a boa constrictor? And when you actually do the math about how much your pet cat eats, my pet cat, let's say, eats in terms of animal products. Cats are obligate carnivores. They need to eat meat. They were not designed by evolution to survive on apples and carrots. And I thought, why should we be raising, millions of mice to be killed every year, simply to be eaten by snakes, when we could just go to the animal shelter and get them? And so I also worked out, I have a lot of friends who are animal activists. Almost all of them have cats. When I did the math, the moral calculus, I realized that the number of animals killed to feed the cats of American animal rights activists was vastly greater than the number of animals killed in animal research every year. So my animal activist friends were, many of them were vegetarians and vegans, but they also had cats that did not share their moral concerns about eating flesh. And so I had painted myself into this sort of hole, this sort of corner, where my logic was telling me it was okay to feed kittens to boa constrictors. But yet in my heart, I know that it was not right. I mean, I just couldn't stand the idea. And so that was when I started really thinking about this connection between logic and emotion in how we make moral decisions about animals. And by the way, this is something that I've been chasing down now for for 30 years,
Yeah, and it's, I mean, it's that recurring theme through the book. Anybody, I just think anybody who started listening to it, half of them have probably switched off already. I'm sorry, it probably wasn't the best thing to start with, but it's that sort of.
Oh, by the way, I'm just to be sure, I've never fed kittens to boa constrictor. I think it would be morally wrong to do that. Okay. By the way, I am more morally conflicted by being a cat owner than I am anything else. Yeah. I love cats.
Yeah, we're in between cats at the moment, and we have fish and we have 4 tortoises. So that's okay. My wife looks after other people's horses, so that's how she has the horses. So, but it is that really difficult sort of situation that the idea of feeding kittens to boa constrictors is you find very few people that would go with that. I hope. But as you say, there's this vast use of animals and abuse of animals in various situations. And one of the other things that there's somewhere you mentioned the issue that I think it's when you talk about the cockfighting, and that there is a moral code that is very much affected also by people's socioeconomic status. So, people don't have, well, I don't know, maybe in the States it's more than the UK because people don't like hunting in this country. But yeah, there's no laws against trophy hunting in the US, but cockfighting, dogfighting, and why we don't see that. And do you think that is just pure politics, or?
I guess I wouldn't say it's pure politics, but I guess one of the things that I've learned, one of the things I've changed my mind about. I'm always interested when sort of, researchers and people like me sort of change their mind about pretty fundamental stuff. And for most of my career, I was pretty much of a standard evolutionary psychologist. That was my main general paradigm. I saw human behavior through this lens of biological evolution, including a lot of our ethics. And my study of human-animal interactions has caused me to rethink that. And I now think that the biggest factor in how we think about animals and how we interact with animals and how we use animals is culture. And I used to make fun of my friends that were sociologists and anthropologists, and I thought they were just so wrong in their basic way of thinking. And now I've come to change my mind. I've come to really appreciate the role of culture in human life, and particularly the way that we deal with animals. Let's take, for example, eating animals. Mm-hmm. And one of the biggest mistakes that I made in the first version of my book, there's a chapter in there on meat. Mm. And I argued that humans are natural meat eaters, which I still believe that is the case. However, at the time, I didn't realize the size of the cultural differences in meat consumption. And I don't know why I didn't, because I could have easily have gone to Google and I could have found that out easily, which I subsequently did. So if you look at national, and this also applies to pet keeping, even the numbers in some ways are similar with pet keeping and meat eating. If you look at meat eating, it turns out that the United States, when it comes to keeping dogs for pets and with eating animals, the United States is an outlier. And so in the United States, the average American, if you include fish and shellfish, eats about 240 pounds of meat per year. It's per capita per year. It's right at the top of meat eating countries. In India, people eat on average about 10 pounds of meat per year. And then the rest of the countries sort of line up along that thing. So in India, people get by eating the United States, we eat 25 times more meat than we do in India. By the way, when I say the same numbers are true for dogs, 240 pounds of meat. The United States has roughly 240 dogs per 1,000 people. And guess what? In India, they have about 10 pounds of meat. They have about 10 dogs per 1,000 people, wow. Pet dogs per 1,000 people. And so what that shows is there's some similar, one of the themes through all my work is that I study human animal interactions probably differently for different reasons than most people in the field. And it's not because I'm an animal lover, and I am an animal lover. I've got a PhD in animal behavior, but I was drawn to this field because I was interested in how our interactions and how we think about animals, particularly ethical aspects, but increasingly things like pet keeping and stuff like that, how they reflect basic aspects of human nature. So to me, it's like this incredibly rich window into really deep things about what it means to be a human. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. No,
that's why that's what draws me to this. It's not, I'm real interested in the role of pets in people's lives right now, but it's not because I'm convinced, I'm a pet lover and I'm convinced that pets are good for people. It's because I see the passion. I see that our interactions with pets represent like the good and the bad in human nature. And so that's really the central, that's my message, Yeah.
I mean, I think I've said sort of, I've got more interested in human-animal interactions and the beneficial side because my background as a vet and dealing with behavior problems, I think I'm getting to that age where I don't want to get bitten by dogs anymore. I want to deal with the nice dogs. So I've come at it from that angle. But I do find it intriguing. And
I want to ask you. I don't want to drop that. I don't want to do it now. But before we hang up the phone,
go for it. No.
Before we hang up the phone, I've got a question for you as a veterinarian.
Okay. So as I said, I picked up the book and delved into it, and the two texts kept coming back to me as I was reading through this. One, Simon Baron-Cohen's book, 0 Degrees of Empathy. Do you know that book at all?
I know his work, but I know his work on autism. I know his work on gays and stuff like that, but I have not read that book.
So, and I'd appreciate your thoughts on this. And I'm not here to bring a surprise on you, because so people who don't know, Simon Baron-Cohen, whose cousin is Sacha Baron Cohen, otherwise known as Borat. But he's perhaps the world's leading authority on autism. That's Simon, not Sacha. And he wrote this book, 0 Degrees of Empathy. And you can probably tell by the name, obviously Jewish heritage. And the book actually starts with him as a child going to shake hands with somebody and then realizing that their hands are on the opposite arms. And they're an Auschwitz survivor. They had their hands literally transplanted across. And but anyway, in the book, one of the things he talks about, one of the ideas is that as humans evolved, that they had to be able to switch off empathy in order to kill animals and hunt them. As they became, associated with the intelligence, you had to put yourself in the mind of an animal to hunt it. But then if you put your mind, if you put your mind into that of an animal, then you have to accept a degree of equivalence, in which case killing them is, causes a lot of dissonance, for want of a better term. And so a lot of the cultures, he argues, that this is why they have the rituals after killing an animal, and you give thanks for the opportunity to eat, etc. And he sees it as a really fundamental sort of trait, that in order to do that, and as things have progressed, that you have to switch off the empathy. So you can't feel the same for the pig as you do the kitten, going back to our kittens, And I found it a really fascinating idea. And I don't know, as I said, I've never really looked into it before. And sort of what the scientific evidence is for it, or whether it's just his idea. And he does then weave that in, that ability to switch off empathy varies between people. And so, you will get it, and it will, as with any trait, it's advantageous in certain situations at certain levels. So, but in one extreme form, you will see it in sort of largely switched off in psychopaths, and also some people with autism as well. And I'm not saying, please, anyone listening to this, I'm not saying people with autism are psychopaths, but it's one of the personality dimensions that potentially could come. And yeah, so quite apart from sort of it as a theory, just thinking about it in relation to our relationships with animals. And the other text that I was thinking of is Mary Midgley.
One of my favorite philosophers.
Yeah. So, and it's funny because I said the podcast before was with Sandra McCune, and the first time I met Sandra, we didn't realize that it was at a thing called the Niche Conference, and Mary Midgley spoke, and she gave this wonderful presentation, as she always does. But it was about the fact that actually there is a justifiable way of having, it is justifiable to have different moral concerns for those that are closest to you, and as you extend out from that area. And there are just two things that I said that struck me as I picked up this again. I hadn't thought about it. And I don't know, this idea of being able to switch off empathy. I don't know if you've thought about it, and in the 2 minutes since I just blurted it out, but and what your thoughts are, that maybe that explains some of our inconsistencies. The fact that we can switch off empathy, not totally, but we can perhaps do it in a very species specific way in order to be able to do the things that make us successful. I'm not saying it's right that we do them, but actually to stop caring about something allows you to perhaps succeed in certain environments. Although, as I said, if society and culture says, no, that's a bad thing to do, then, if you do that, then you end up banged up in jail.
Let me address that a couple of ways. First of all, I had not read Baron Cohen's book, but that argument that he made is virtually identical to the argument that James Serpell makes in The Company of Animals, which is 1985 book, which probably had bigger impact on me than anything. Is it basically everything in Chuck Berry John Lennon apparently once said everything in rock and roll is a variation on a theme by Chuck Berry. And I've always felt that everything in anthrozoology was a variation on a theme by James Serpell and In the Company of Animals. And he, in the second half of his book, he makes that same argument. And I've been thinking about that. That's influenced my thinking so much. So I completely agree with that. I had not thought of it in terms of being able to turn empathy on and off, but I've seen that happen. And I think that's exactly right. I think it makes an enormous amount of difference. And let me give an example of that from my own work. And you mentioned that I had done work with cockfighting, and this was I can give you the situation that I was in that I wound up doing this, but it was probably the thing that really got me seriously thinking about the twists and turns of human interactions with animals. So my wife and I got my master's degree from the University of Tennessee, which was on the love songs of alligators. I was not dealing with human-animal interactions, and I got a job at this small college in the mountains of western North Carolina, not far from where I presently live. And this was in the 1970s, and it was not nearly as gentrified. And the area that I live in now has become very cool and, nationally, internationally known for having good restaurants and brew pubs and all that. But it wasn't like that then. This was real rural. And we lived way up a dirt road and didn't have any, use wood heat and all that stuff. And so I get this job at this little college, and at some point they decided they liked me, and they said, well, we'll give you a tenure track position if you'll go get your doctoral degree. And it was obviously animal behavior. I didn't know what to do with it. So I thought, well, chickens, I can do it on chickens. I didn't know anything about chickens, but I was there in the woods. I knew I could raise chickens. And so my dissertation wound up being on genetic differences in different strains of baby chicks. And so it turns out that some of my neighbors were rooster fighters. And I did not know anything about that culture. I didn't know people fought chickens, and but I needed eggs for my baby chicks for my doctoral dissertation. I made friends with some of these folks, and they asked me if I would go to a rooster fight with them. And I'd also had gotten some chickens some game chickens myself, to try and teach my dog not to steal my neighbor's, not to invade my neighbor's hen house. So I wound up going to this rooster fight with these guys. And by the way, this was all very illegal. So I was sort of worried the cops were going to bust us and all that. And so I went to this rooster fight, and I was, chickens, fighting each other, not my thing. And I just remember coming home at night, just being like, had these images in my head of all the craziness that was going on at this organized rooster fight. And the more I thought about it, the more the thing that interested me was the people. And the thing that was interesting about them was that how normal they were. And here these people are, involved in the stereotypically, psychosexual, craziness of, fighting chickens and stuff like that. But they were like every normal everyday people. I knew some of them. One guy was a local pharmacist in the town. Another guy was a policeman. Another guy ran
illegal business, but it's a policeman.
Another guy owned a garage. And so I wound up, my doctoral dissertation was this weird combination of, part of it was on the chickens, and then part of it was on the culture of cockfighting. So I did the same sort of thing that Gary Marvin, who you might know in the UK, one of my favorite anthrozoologists, did something similar. So I spent a couple of years going to rooster fights. And the thing that I discovered was that the rooster fighters had this intense relationship with their chickens. I mean, they really love their chickens. They were so proud of them. And one of my ways that I was able to get in with these people was I was into photography at the time, and I would take my camera and I would take pictures of them and their roosters and their children and the roosters and all that. And I'd give them nice pictures of that, and they really enjoyed that. So these were just common, everyday Western North Carolina people. They tended to be blue collar workers. They tended to be conservative. They tended to go to church on Sunday. They were not the stereotype that you would think. But then they also had this incredible respect for these chickens. But then when they go to the rooster fight, in a rooster fight, you take 6 roosters to a rooster fight. You're lucky if you come back with 3 of them still alive. And when a rooster dies in a pit, which it usually does within a minute to an hour, depending on how long the fight goes, they just take it and they throw it in a pile. And so to me, that was a really good example of what you're talking about, just switching off that empathy. And, I would ask, I was like, did you ever cry because when your rooster dies? And they look at me like, man, college boy, you don't know nothing, man. Of course not. So, but they did really love these animals in many ways. And so, you could actually see this turning off of empathy in the fight,
But so if their chicken lost, and we'll talk about happier things than chickens killing each other, but if the chicken lost, did they feel a sense of shame that the chicken had let them down, or the chicken had let itself down?
No, not really. Not really, because you feel a little bit of shame when you feel pride when your chicken wins. The one time they do feel a sense of shame, horrible shame, if their chicken goes chicken. In other words, they want, what you want in these animals is bravery. And sometimes what will happen is the chicken will get hurt. It doesn't happen very often. And they'll start squawking, quack, 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 and they'll start running around the pit. And people at that point will start making fun of you, and they'll go, they'll start booing and hooting. And that's really shameful. You do not want your chicken. You want your chicken, even if losing is one thing. Losing bravely is what you want. And they call that having true grit. And that's what they're breeding for. That's what they're selecting for courage. And so if your chicken if your chicken shows courage and dies, that's okay. It's
an admirable death.
It's an admirable death. If your chicken acts like a yellow coward chicken, they kill it immediately. They wouldn't kill it in front of everybody, but they'd take it back. They'd take it back to the little hut that they would have, their little hut, and they would instantly kill it.
Wow.
Into the bloodline. So there's tremendous selection on not being submissive.
Wow. Okay. as I say, for anybody who is still listening, we're going to talk about things other than chickens killing each other. But as I said, the human-animal interactions, and as I said, one of the things that I started to sort of hear about was, as I say, I mentioned in the beginning, your healthy skepticism about some of the benefits of pets, and that the criticism of of a lot of the work, that the evidence certainly is not as strong as is often portrayed. We're currently trying to do some work looking at what it is about dog ownership that may be beneficial. And to me, the way that I came at this was, people were making claims about, dog ownership gives you this. I'm thinking, well, having spent most of my professional life trying to sort out people's relationships with their dogs, I don't believe that owning a dog is necessarily good for your health, because I see very, very stressed people, and the load of having a pet with a problem it's a big emotional cost for people. And so it just struck me as such a crude measure to just say, do you own a dog? And even though sort of you've got things like the biophilia hypothesis, I don't know if it's as simple as that. But so we just started to look at doing interviews with people and started to say, well, what is it that you do with your dog? Or we've done it with the cats as well. We are going to start doing it with reptile owners, you'll be pleased to hear. We're going to hopefully next year do some work with reptile owners. There were two things that came out. First, one of the first things that struck us was most of the stuff on aspects of pet ownership and its effect on well-being seemed to focus on hedonic measures, emotional measures, how it makes you feel. And I'm not a psychologist, so you may put me right here, but my understanding is that when you think about hedonic states and human well-being, they're pretty transient. You can have, I've had a busy week, but I'm feeling good at the moment because I'm chatting to you, so it's so transient. So actually knowing about how somebody is feeling is not actually likely to transmit too much necessarily to health measures, because it's such a variable state. So that was the first thing. So we asked people about how owning the pets made them feel, but we also asked them about the sort of more traditional, their self-perceived states of flourishing well-being, autonomy, environmental mastery, personal growth, purpose in life. And again, that's one of the things that came through in this group, this book, when I was reading it, dipping into it, with the turtles as well. People who get involved in these sorts of activities, and I think they're possibly the things that are far more important when it comes to health benefits, because also those things are less transient. And so so that was the first thing, was to sort of shift away from, well, my dog makes me happy. Yeah, I'm sure it does, and that's great. How much that's going to translate though through to health benefits, or whether that's the root of health benefits, as opposed to my dog makes me feel like I've got a purpose in life, was the first question that we sort of were concerned about. And then the second thing is, it's not owning the dog, or it's what you do. If you don't walk the dog, you're not going to get the benefits of physical exercise. And so we wanted to start to tease out all the different things that people do, and that's where we sort of started to look at the different sort of categories of things. And something which wouldn't have been there 20 years ago, taking pictures of my pet, those sorts of activity, because everybody's got smartphones, everyone can take pictures and whatever. But starting to try and then group those things into an order. So there are some things that are inevitable about being a pet owner, which you would predict then that should be common across pet owners, but we don't know if they're the important things. And what we're trying to do is, as I said, strip that down, and then once we've we think we're starting to get those sort of common themes across the different groups. The next thing is to actually monitor these things in people in real time and also their health. And I'm hoping then that we may be in a position to have sort of make better predictions about what it is about pet ownership. And I just wondered, sort of with your own sort of thought, I mean, how you think sort of the history of the claims of the benefits from pet ownership, quite apart from the flaws of the studies, in terms of population bias, mostly female. You've got people who love animals anyway taking part, small sample sizes. Your thoughts with regards to sort of maybe we've been looking at some of the wrong things?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely onto something. And let me to put this into perspective for people that might not know me as what did you call me, the healthy skeptic or something, something like that. Or, when I was never, for the first 20 or so years that I studied human-animal interactions, I had no interest at all in human-pet relationships or the impact of pets on health. And the reason was that, I'd go to the meetings and I would hear talks by, my friends that were working in that area, and I would hear these talks that, people survive, heart attack better, all this stuff. And I would read it. I would read the journal articles and stuff like that. So I was quite convinced that, that pets were very important, were an important component of human health. And then when I was writing this book, this was a little over 10 years ago, I had to write a chapter on pets. I was primarily, before that, I was interested in these ethical issues that we were talking about before. How do good people do bad things with animals, and how do bad people do good things with animals, and how is it that hunters can like deer so much, and empathy. I was interested in that sort of thing. I wasn't interested in pets, but I had to write this chapter on pets, and so I started, and I had to do something about pets and health. So I started collecting the papers, the literature. And basically my filing system when I was writing these chapters was piles of stuff on my office floor. And I would have a pile of papers this high. I print everything out. I'm old school, I all the important stuff out. So I had a pile this high. Pets are good for people. They're healthier. They lose weight, all this stuff. And then I had a surprisingly large stack of things where they found no effect. And then I had a stack where the pet owners were worse on, studies, epidemiological studies showing that pet owners were worse on. So that's when I started looking at this seriously. And what started bugging me was what I consider facile pet industry claims that everybody should get a pet, because if you get a pet, you're going to lose weight, you're going to be happier, you're going to be less lonely, this, and this. And I started uncovering, it's like, well, no, not everybody's finding that. And I would give these talks at meetings, and much to my surprise, instead of getting vilified, my message was pretty well received. It's like, yeah, we need better. I was also pointing out problems with the research, some of which you mentioned. Let me give an example of what I consider pet industry. I don't know how to say it, but pet industry propaganda. So, you hear claims, by certain trade organizations that, people with getting a pet will make you less depressed. So, one of the things I do is I write this to keep up my interest, in part to keep intellectually alive. I write this blog for Psychology Today. So I said, well, I'll take a look at the literature and what papers say about pets and depression. I was really surprised. I found 30 papers that had looked at the impact of varying levels of quality, which had looked at the impact of pets on depression, pet ownership on depression. I think I found that 5 found unequivocally that pet owners were less depressed. 5 found that they were more depressed, and the other 20 found no difference. So the claim, so there was this overstatement of the claim, and I found the same thing. I did the same thing with loneliness, And what happens is when you actually look deeper into the literature, the impact of pets on health, it's not nearly as clear as you think. Okay, here's the problem. The problem is that I'm a pet owner. I know that I feel better because of having a pet. I know. My daughter got this dog. My daughter's sort of a prickly person, one of my daughters. And this dog has changed her life for the better so much. She's so in love. She's so in love with her dog. And it's just incredible to see. She's more active. She's more social. She's having more fun. And this dog has just made such a positive impact. But the problem is when you actually look at the empirical literature, those things aren't being picked up. And so there's this really interesting mismatch between what we know to be true in our hearts and what we can see in our friends sometimes, and what is. So I think you're onto something. I remember, and I think you're making a great point about these transient effects. I remember there were some Dutch researchers that have been studying, instead of looking at how lonely have you felt over the last week, they were doing these like time sampling things, like how lonely do you feel right now? Yeah. And I thought that was a really neat thing to do. I thought that was like, man, you guys are really onto something. And they had really good measures. So I think you're onto something. I think we are in some ways measuring the wrong things. I think these scales are pretty crude, and oftentimes you're quite correct. Oftentimes, especially what you tend to see is studies that either have too few subjects or that have too many subjects. And the ones that have too many subjects tend to be these epidemiological studies that are done for another reason. Like there's a couple of big things in the UK, there's some in Europe and the United States and stuff like that. And they may have 100,000 subjects in there, and they may have one question that says, do you own a pet? Yeah. And it's not like how attached are you to your pet, or even what kind of pet it is. And so, and plus when you have these large sample sizes, you can, small difference can become very meaningful. So my beef is I do have a beef with pet industry claims that if everybody gets a pet, their life's going to be better. And I've heard pet industry people say, our goal is for everybody to have a pet. And I think that's just inappropriate. Pets are not good for everybody. But I think you're quite right. I think we need better measures, and I'm not sure we're asking the right questions off the time. And I think the qualitative, I love your idea about photography. I think some of these alternative measures are going to provide more insight than a question on macroepidemiological.
It's interesting because just during lockdown, one of the other hobbies that I've sort of got much more into is doing macro photography, and so much so that I think a few weeks ago, came back from a walk, and my wife showed me the picture that she'd been taking, and it's basically me lying on the ground trying to take a picture of a toadstool, and says, "This is what my walks look like now." But the thing about macro photography is,
by the way, for readers that don't know, macro photography is taking pictures of really small
things with a big lens.
A special little lens to do it.
So you walk more slowly because you're looking for those little things, and then you stop and you're trying to look at it from different angles, etc. And I find that it's like meditation, because you just lose yourself in the moment. And it's those sorts of things that, and that's why I think sort of trying to explore with people what they get out of it. And I said, especially having spent 30 plus years helping people with problem pets, and I see the drain that it is on them. And part of the drain is also the fact that they're not going to give up on the pet. And it's because they can't give up on the pet. There's that emotional connection that it's taking even more toll on them, partly in that situation. And you mentioned your blog, The Psychology Today, Animals and Us, which again, if people don't know it, I will recommend it, and I'll make sure we put a link in there. And you did a blog about some of the work we did with my friends up in York on the COVID. One of the interesting things there was about the strength of the bond, and the people with the stronger bonds had worse mental health. And although there were benefits, as we sort of pointed out the fact there were benefits from people with a pet did feel less lonely, but it's a relatively small effect. And we don't know how clinically meaningful that was. But it was this factor that, and I know you've written about this also, so, you know, anxious owners and anxious pets. And I'm going off on a tangent here, but one of my beefs at the moment is that a lot of people are talking about pets being fearful and anxious when actually the pets are frustrated.
Ah.
And I wonder if some of what, this anxious owners, anxious pets, you can measure anxiety in owners and you measure the levels of neuroticism. And I'm not convinced that their dogs necessarily are anxious, but I do see a lot of owners who are highly anxious with very frustrated dogs. And, you know, we're looking at the relationship between people and their dogs. And the problem comes if you suffer from anxiety is the inconsistency of your behavior. And, you know, dogs want an easy life. And if they can predict they're human, they can often get an easy life. Even if their human is predictably quite bad, they can still predict them and they know what they have to do. The problem is when people are inconsistent. And one of the things, it's one of those things that I want to do a project on, but haven't got around to writing it, and we've got plenty of master students who do it. And one of the things I think that dogs really struggle with is raised voices. You know, dogs don't understand language in the same way that we do, but they do, you know, they do appreciate that there are words coming out, and those words they can pick out certain things from it. And this is just my pop theory. You can say it's rubbish, it's fine. I'm hoping you will, because as I said, you're known for your honesty. But I just think, you know, for a dog, hearing a raised voice, they can pick up on the emotion of it, the anger and stuff like that. I don't think they've got any concept of what they can do to try and solve that situation. And that makes it incredibly stressful for them, raised voices, because especially if you've got a couple who are arguing, quite apart from them screaming at the dog, but if you've got like teenage, you know, we know that teenagers in the house, often it's come up in several studies to show that teenagers in the house increases the risk of problem behavior.
Interesting.
Couples arguing, you know, I see that potentially a lot. And they may be arguing because they've got a problem dog, you know, we don't know the direction of the effect. But I just thought, trying to think about it from the dog's point of view, what do you make of your humans if they are raising voices? And, you know, you're trying to extract information and there's nothing there that actually helps you. And you're part of this social group and something isn't right and there's nothing you can do. And that makes it incredibly stressful for the dog. So, and does that make the dog anxious? To me, frustration is about autonomy. Anxiety is actually about a threat of harm. And the problem is, I think in the English language, the word anxiety is very, very ambiguous, you know, and it's completely different how we use it in psychology and neuroscience to how the common usage. And that, I think, also is a problem for us as well. And, you know, if anybody's listening who's sort of thinking, surely they're going to talk about dogs at some point rather than chickens, then, you know, just I think it's one of the hardest things you can do if you raise your voices for dogs to work out what's going on. So next time you think about this sort of anxious dogs, anxious people, just make a few more questions about it.
I was not, but you got to remember, I get lots of questions about dogs and stuff like that, but actually I don't know anything about dogs. I haven't had a dog for 20 years, and I'm not a dog researcher. But that particular piece that I wrote, that particular blog, what I did was I was surprised by the results. Okay, if I see a single study now these days, I don't really believe the result. I don't take the results too seriously until I start seeing a pattern. And that's what happened. And that was, so I went back and I looked at, It was a question of the humans, the people have the same personalities as their dog. Is there a relationship between a person's personality and the dog's personality? And we do have some bad language going on here, because one of the personality tests which is used is the Big Five personality, and the factor that has the biggest correlation with behavior of dogs is a factor which in the Big Five test is called neuroticism. Unfortunately, it's not called anxiety, it's called neuroticism. And that, it doesn't mean you're neurotic in the classical Freudian sense. By the way, I score high on that. People are finding, I've taken, of course, all these tests, and I score very high on the neuroticism scale on that now. But what I found was, I don't know, 6 or 7, 8 studies which reported that owners that scored high in either neuroticism or maybe a different scale, but an anxiety scale or something like that, also tended to have dogs which had similar sorts of problems. So the question is why, and I didn't weigh in on why that should be the case. I was just impressed by the fact that, oh, and by the way, there's researchers whose work you tend to respect more than others, and these studies tended to be by researchers who I thought, these guys and women were pretty good. So I didn't know what to make of it. So the question from me to you would be: the anxious people tend to yell at their dog, tend to yell at their dogs more. So that would be the missing.
I think they may be. Well, anxious people may be more prone to breaking down in tears and whatever, and that's very difficult for the dog to understand. But I think it's more about anxious people perhaps being inconsistent, and inconsistency is perhaps challenging for the dogs. So, and we might want to label that as the dog being anxious. So, I mean, a number of studies have looked at, owner personality and separation related problems, and commonly called separation anxiety. And I would argue, we published some work a couple of years ago, that what we call separation anxiety, there is an anxiety just before you leave, but once you've left, the dog's behavior is not related to anxiety, it's related to frustration. The dog is trying to get out. It's I do not want to be here for whatever reason. That is frustration. And again, it's become a bit of a sort of elephant in the room for me, that too much we've talked about anxiety in our protocols, and again in the clinic, we often get these cases, and they've perhaps seen 2 or 3 behaviorists before they've come to us, and they've been given what looks on the face of it like good advice, and and I think historically in the past we've said sort of, well, they're just not implementing the advice. Well, the sorts of routines, the classic sort of desensitization counter-conditioning program, in my experience, doesn't work terribly well for frustration-related problems. We need better methods. It works well for anxieties, working on those thresholds, etc. But actually, we need, and I've actually working on it earlier today, actually, with one of my colleagues, we need to start to develop frustration tolerance exercises, teaching animals about delayed rewards. You're not going to get everything that you want when you want it, and that's partly we've done a lot of stuff on impulsivity and impulse control, but equally it's about, there's a big reward, but you're going to have to wait for it. And I was actually chatting to the students this week about the whole issue of socialization, because there seems to have, in recent years, and I don't know if the same has gone in the States, but this idea of socializing your dog. And we seem to have gone from sort of, socialization not existing, to people talking about socialization and thinking that socialization means that a dog should bound up to a complete stranger dog and just go off and play with it. And actually, that's not, to me, a well-socialized dog. That's a dog who's very playful. And actually, I think what most people want is a dog that politely says hello, and then if given permission, goes off and plays. And we're getting these dogs just bounding along, and bounding into other dogs. And some of these dogs are a bit hesitant. And if you've got somebody bounding into your face, then it ends up in a dog fight. And I just wonder if some of the things like puppy parties and stuff like that have actually got something to answer for, because some of them, that you see, and all they do is they just let the puppies play. And you just think, whoa, hang on, this has got to be controlled. In fact, the client I had just yesterday, they were saying that the puppy classes they went to, then their dog would get over exuberant, so they would take him out. And I said, that's not the way we run our puppy classes. If we run puppy classes and we've got an exuberant dog, we don't take the exuberant dog out. What we do is we take every other dog out, so that the exuberant dog learns that if I play like that, all my mates disappear. And so it's his behavior as opposed to taking him out, and he's responding to something happening to him as opposed to his behavior resulting in all the other puppies disappearing, is a much more effective way of teaching a dog to have better manners around other dogs. So I just think there's a lot that we need to do about frustration in dogs. But
well, let me remember I said earlier that there was a question I wanted to ask you about, and it's sort of related to this. So for the most part, people, it's been my experience that most researchers, historically this has been the case, it might be less true now, most researchers that go into the study of human-animal relationships, or anthrozoology. Anthrozoology, by the way, has changed from when I first got into the field. When I first got in the field, the conferences had people talking about all kinds of stuff, moral issues faced by medical students when they were dissecting dogs, interactions between zookeepers and the animals that they do. And now anthrozoology has gotten narrower and narrower and narrower. And a couple of years ago, I did a little analysis of what, when you look at the journal Anthrozoology, or actually less so there, but if you look at the papers presented at the Society for the International Society for Anthrozoology, almost all the papers are concerned with human-dog relationships, human pet relationships, and the impact of pets on human health or well-being. And so this field is sort of, to me, this is sad, because I was drawn to the field because I was interested in the anthropology stuff, the history stuff. I love the idea that you go to a conference where there were veterinarians, there were social workers, there were people in nursing, there were people coming from zoo biology, and increasingly the study of human dog and human pet relationships. And the field draws, as researchers, people that are a priori, they're animal lovers, and they're mostly dog lovers increasingly, and they're absolutely convinced that dogs are the best thing that can happen. And so one of the reasons why, like, I see a lot of papers in which they will have equivocal results, or sometimes even negative results, but yet at the end of the paper or in the abstract, they'll spin the results to make it sound like it was all good. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
One of the things I loved about that paper that you were talking about earlier, that you all recently published about COVID and dogs, is like, the way it ended is like, do not take this paper to mean that you should go out and get a dog. And I'm saying we're increasing it, but so and I remember one time, this was about 15 years ago, I was talking to a very senior researcher in anthrozoology, and I said, I won't give the person's name. I just said, like, what we really need is we have tons of studies of people that love pets. Like people, they're getting they're recruiting they're using snowball sampling to get their things like that. They're saying online, I'm looking for do a study on human-dog relationships. You get a bunch of pet lovers. And I said, like, well, we really need more studies on people that don't like their pets. And I started asking my students in my class, I'd say, how many of you live with an animal, or you have a friend who lives with an animal, a pet, that they either don't like or they're afraid of? And usually about a third of the hands would go up. And so now we're getting, researchers, like you, Carrie Westcott, people like that, you're coming out of, animal, dog training, have a history in dog training and stuff like that. So what you're seeing is the downside of human-animal relationships. And I just wondered, to me, it's interesting. Is that, so we have a fair number of researchers in our field now that they go to work, or they very commonly have to deal with people who things are not going well at all. But there's the disproportion. There's not that many papers on that. Like, so what you were talking about, the problem in my book, in my book on pets, when the dog's pet or the thing, I talk about a couple whose marriage breaks up because of conflicts over the pets. And I just wondered how it's sort of a mismatch there between what people are sort of sometimes publish in their studies about the positive impact of pets on people, but yet downplay mostly this idea that there can be and the other thing is veterinarians have to do is euthanize pets in front of their owners. I mean, what could be worse than that?
It is tough, and it's something which I know since leaving sort of general practice, and when sort of we've had to have our cats put to sleep or something like that, you think, whoa, when I was in practice, I could do this and I could do it with my own animals. Now, it hits you so much harder in those situations. But just picking up on your point about sort of the other side, I would love to do more work on people who don't like pets and exploring it. As you say, our deputy head of school, actually, she's scared of dogs. And I think the fear side you can easily tap into. But as you say, I hadn't thought about trying to approach partners who, they tolerate the animal because they love their partner.
We have a cat. We've had cat Tilly for 10 years. My wife doesn't particularly like Tilly. She puts up with her. But she's not really an animal person. She finds when she pets a cat or dog, she sort of goes up and sort of taps them on the head and stuff like that. But you can tell it's like.
Yeah, and it's interesting because people often surprised that I haven't got a dog, and I say, well, my wife doesn't particularly like dogs.
There you go.
And I travel, and it's not fair on me to get a dog just for the time that I'm at home. Now, okay, the last 2 years I've been at home a lot, and I probably, but having a dog is more than a 2-year commitment.
That's right.
But it reminds me of a bit of work that we did a few years ago, and we did publish part of it. It was actually a master's student, and it was on self-disclosure, and we were looking at people and how much they did self-disclosure with their dog compared to their partner, compared to their best friend. And the classic result was 85% plus of people that responded were female. And
very common.
Yeah, and I'll give you the headline, and then I'll tell you the anecdote, the bit that isn't in the paper. So what we found was that, the majority of the population, female, heterosexual. So that was the group that we published the data on, and they would say sort of, well, if I can talk to my dog because the dog will just listen, or I can talk and get it out of my system. And so I don't talk to my partner or my husband about some of the issues because I know that if I speak to him, he will want to go and fix it, and I don't want him to go and fix so those sorts of things, I just want to be heard, and I want to get off my chest. And it really was, men are from Mars and women are from Venus.
I was going to say,
classic sort of situation, and it's so much that stereotype that sort of, well, I'll discuss certain things with my husband if I want it fixed, but the dog is actually the better listener in those situations. But and that's the way that it went. And female friends likewise were similar to the dogs in that, but the dog still scored higher, and there was that sense that the dog would never betray you because it doesn't go around the back of the bike sheds and gossip to the other dogs about what you've just told them. But so I sat down with the student and said, look, we've got a very small male sample here. What I'd like you to do is just try and find out, is it that the men don't want to answer questionnaires, or is it something else? Because we got quite a good response. So she went off and started to do some interviews. She came back, she said, I'm getting a fairly consistent picture here that they're not doing the questionnaire because they're saying, I don't talk to my dog. Why would I do a questionnaire about what do I talk to my dog about? Because I'm not interested in talking to my dog. Every time I talk to my dog is when I'm swearing at him because I've tripped over him or something.
That's interesting.
Okay. So, I mean, and as I said, that there were males and that were different, etc. But that was, to her, that was the thing that we were getting out as to why we weren't getting the sample, because they just didn't engage in those activities. Interestingly, with the health stuff, though, because it's much broader and the way we've done the interviews, then we are getting, we've balanced the samples much more in that situation. So we're trying to cover everything. We're now in the point where we're going to start moving into more quantitative work. So we think we've covered the domains. What we want to try and do is actually try and scale it. And I just hope that men will do the questionnaires as well. So we've got something going on at the moment.
It's a big problem. I wrote a blog post on this recently, and I went. Oh, I know what I did. I went and I looked at the number of subjects, male or sex ratio of subjects published in the journal Anthrozoology for over a couple of years, and a large majority of studies had a disproportionate number of females. And in some cases, it was such, there might be 30 women and 4 men. And I would argue in a case like that, you should just get rid of the 4 men and just say we did a study of females.
And that's what we did with
I think that's the thing to do.
Yeah. So with Aitlin's work, that's exactly what we did. We sort of, there isn't really a big enough sample here.
Yeah.
And and it's a little bit like, I was sort of joke that most of what people take as human psychology is based on white middle-class 20-year-old Americans in the 1960s, who I don't think is the greatest representation of the human race.
Absolutely.
No disrespect.
Well, I think that's one of the, just as I said, Americans eat 240 pounds of meat per person. I think we're also outliers in terms of our relationships with animals in many ways. I know my wife and I, just before COVID, my wife and I were fortunate. We spent a week on the island of Tobago, and it was the first time I had been in a place where they had a substantial number of basically feral, unowned dogs or semi-owned dogs just running around. They got to run around. And I spent a chunk of my time in Tobago, watching these street dogs, and I concluded that if I were going to come back and the next life as a dog, I'd rather be a Tobago street dog than I'd rather be the typical dog living in the United States. Right?
Yeah,
and
that was the other thing. When I read this, it reminded me of a paper that I read. It was either sort of towards the end of my degree, or it might have been shortly after I graduated, by I think it was, a guy called David Favre, and it was in a book on animal ethics, and I can't remember the exact title, but it was basically and let's say your writing reminded me of it, in so much as it was just such a brilliant take, and it was basically the further tales of Flopsy, Mopsy, Cottontail, and Peter. And it says sort of, after Beatrix Potter, then actually these 4 rabbits ended up, one of them ended up as a child's pet, one of them ended up in a research facility, one of them ended up and one of them lived wild. And it looked at the life issues. And I just remember reading that. And by the end of that, there was no doubt that if there was one type of rabbit you didn't want to be, it was the pet rabbit,
That's interesting.
And it's just, but it's that sort of twist and just making us, pause and reflect. And again, I don't want people to go away. So, I look after my rabbit, and rabbit care has come enormous strides. But I would certainly say in the 1980s, it was not a happy life for the vast majority of rabbits. And I think there are still big welfare issues. I'm not saying they're not brilliant people. There's people like the Rabbit Welfare Trust, who do some great work in this country with house rabbits and rabbits in general. But people can sort of criticize, oh, the lab animal, whatever. But certainly in the 1980s, you'd probably argue that the average lab rabbit had a better quality of life than the average rabbit in a hutch down the end of the garden. The number of times we used to see flies struck, they'd be eaten alive with maggots.
That you're on dangerous territory there. There's a chapter in my book on chickens, and I compare the ethics of the life of a cockfighting chicken with the life of a McDonald's chicken headed for the McNugget business, and I conclude that if you were to come back in the next life as a chicken, you'd much rather be a gamecock, who dies on a Saturday night in a pit in Del Rio, Tennessee, than you'd be a McDonald's chicken. And much to my surprise, animal rights activists have tended to resonate with that argument. Not animal rights activists, but people interested in animal welfare have really said, yeah, you really made me think about that.
Well, I've had the debate with people, and again, I don't condone it, but bullfighting in Spain, and bullfighting is largely being banned, but if you think about the life of a bull that goes into a bullfight, 99.9% of its life, not a bad life. And it's certainly better than being shut up in a feedlot. Right.
Right.
So why do we object to it? Because, well, it's just for sport. And eating is pleasurable. Why do we,
Okay, so I've been thinking about this. If we're just having a chat between the two of us.
Because you've just done this blog on the genetics of vegetarianism as well, so we might.
Okay. Seeing that it's just me and you were sitting at a bar drinking and nobody's listening to this, I've been really thinking lately about the similarities between the logic of eating meat and the logic of keeping pets. And I am a meat eater, and I understand better than most people, because of my research and stuff, the ethical problems associated with eating meat. I know that it's bad for my health. I know that it's terrible for chickens. I know that it's terrible for the environment and all that stuff. I still eat meat, and I do it for one reason and one reason only: it tastes good. So that's my defense of meat.
So in my situation,
I find it tasty. Let me finish that. So so the question is, I've been thinking about the ethics of keeping pets, and what we've done to take, for example. Well, I'm more morally conflicted about cats because I have one, but let's just say dogs. I mean, what we've done to dogs, as we desex them, we deprive them of the joys of sex and motherhood. In the United States now, there's almost no stray dogs at all. So it means every time your dog goes outside, it's got a thing on its neck, and it goes where you want it to go, pretty much. We control every aspect of their lives. Furthermore, what we've done, I don't have to tell you, what we've done in terms of the breeding of dogs, because for our silly, perhaps biologically built-in preferences for things that are cute, we create these animals that could never exist in nature, with brachiocephalic breeds that cannot be born except through cesarean section, that have a slew of genetic problems that we intentionally built in them because we wanted them to look like. And so the question is, how do we defend this? And we defend it for the same reason that I eat meat, which is it gives me pleasure. So it seems to me the bottom line is that the ethical argument for pet keeping and the ethical argument for eating meat are pretty much surprisingly similar. Does that make any sense at all, or am I way off base?
No, it does, and I think and it's a refreshingly honest view of it. But I have been vegetarian, and when my sons aren't around at home, then I tend to be vegetarian with my wife, because she prefers to be vegetarian, and we cook meals together. They come home, I'll quite happily, and I enjoy eating meat. And as you say, and I've always, well, not always, since being a vet, I've justified in eating meat, saying I would quite happily kill an animal to eat it, because and to me, what's more important is about the quality of life, and I won't buy battery eggs, and you want to think about the quality of the life, and I'd love to try Kobe beef because those cows have a good life as well.
They drink beer and they get massaged.
Yeah, exactly. So they have a great life. And so, and I don't think animals worry about death, etc. So if it comes swiftly, then all's well and good. So from that point of view, yeah, and it is uncomfortable because you start to think about it. So, well, we don't need to eat meat, as you say. We do it because we like meat. So, in this country, people talk about fox hunting, and I'm no supporter of fox hunting, and think it's pretty sad that people get well, I guess for me, it's sad that people get the pleasure out of the chase, which involves an element of suffering. That to me is different. That it's one thing to enjoy an animal once it's dead. It's another thing to enjoy the suffering of an animal. And again, that's one of the reasons why, at many levels, the risk of, we'll find out if anyone's listening, at many levels, I have no problems with eating dog. If I went to Korea, I'd have no problem eating dog, but for the fact that how the dogs are kept and how the dogs are killed, which from the stuff that I've seen, I just would not want to. But, if somebody said that, there was this dog and it had a good life and whatever, and it's put on a plate, I have no problem in eating that. I don't know. But I'd like to think that from that point of view, and that is perhaps shocking to people. But as I said, in the case of something like fox hunting, that involves chasing an animal down, and the pleasure comes. And I don't think people are thinking, oh, this fox is suffering and that's brilliant. But the whole process is a stressful experience for the fox. And even though the numbers might be small, and that's why I wouldn't condone it. Go back to the bullfighting.
That's that shutting off of empathy thing that you were talking about earlier.
Yeah. I mean, go back to the bullfighting though. It's being teased a bit, but yeah. And I've never been to a bullfight. I have no desire to go to I say I've got no desire. I'm intrigued by the prospect, but I don't want to give my money to support it. So from that point of view, but yeah, and I don't know what the answer is. And I was just joking with my wife the other night. I was talking about kebabs, and I said to her, well, when I was vegetarian, if I did lapse and I ate a kebab, I convinced myself no animal ever died for the purposes of making a kebab. That's how I would console myself. But I don't know what the answer is. I mean, where are you now? Because this book is what, 10 years old now? And you said you're doing a new edition. So give us a hint of have you any thoughts as to the solutions on this? These dilemmas?
No, I don't know.
Do we just have to accept that we're morally inconsistent?
I tend to not give moral advice. It's interesting. I have plenty of views. I have plenty of political views, left-wingy political views on when it comes to politics. But when it comes to animal issues, I pretty much try and stay out of the fray. And I remember one time, many years ago, I had organized a symposium. I organized a symposium on the animal rights movement at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville. And I invited Ken Shapiro. Ken is a psychologist who started Psychologists for the Ethical Treatment of Animals. I invited Ken to come down. He's a very strong vegan animal rights advocate, and I wanted him to represent that. And we were at the hotel bar having a beer after the symposium. And Ken looked at me and he said, Hal, I don't get you. He said, how come you're not like us? He said, how come you're not like us? He said, you know our arguments, the arguments against eating meat, you know the philosophies, you know Singer and Reagan and all that stuff. You know it better than most animal rights activists do. Why aren't you like us? And I didn't have one possibility is that I'm just a bad person. I don't like that idea. It's possible. But the only thing I could come up with was that I tend to see the world, and we actually did some research on this with animal activists, and I tend to see the moral issues in terms of gray areas. I don't see the world in terms of black and white. I listen to, unlike my wife, I listen to right-wing radio.
Okay.
I think it's important for me to listen to the people that I don't agree with.
Yeah.
When I did the study on cockfighting, I tried to make the cockfighters, I tried to portray them accurately. The next thing I did was a study of animal rights activists and ethnography of animal rights activists. So I tend to not weigh in on these issues in terms of giving people moral advice. And the other thing I will, that's not true. I do have one piece of moral advice. And my moral advice after dealing with these issues, and with myself and with other people as well, is that moral consistency is impossible. And you only go around once in this world. And the trick is and this is the reason why I study human animal interactions. It's like, how do you figure out how to be a good person in a morally complicated way? And I don't tell people what to do in that regard. And I have great respect for the people that I interview and the people that I studied that do take moral issues with animals extremely seriously, so seriously that they're miserable. People told me that they don't like driving in their car. They feel guilty driving in their car because they don't want to squash bugs, or people that I've got examples in my book about people that just make these changes in their life. People whose marriages break up, people who've lost friends, people who just are sad almost all the time because they live in a world surrounded by suffering. And but on the one hand, I admire that, taking people that take these moral issues really seriously. On the other hand, I'm glad I'm not like that. And I wouldn't want to live like that. And I would go to like you go to conferences. For the most part, I go to the anthrozoology conference. You probably go to veterinary conferences. They're fun. You go to the bar, you meet your friends after the thing, stuff like that. I go to animal rights stuff. It's like, no, this is not fun. It's like, there's images of suffering animals all over the place. It's not fun. So I
think that's well, as I said, there's a couple of things. One, as I said, we mentioned, and I just want to mention that in that recent blog that you did on vegetarianism, which may be of some comfort to people, that there does seem to be a genetic influence on people's ability or people's tendency towards being vegetarian, which might explain why it's harder for some than others. And I think that's the other thing for me, is that everybody is an individual, and you can't. And okay, this is my sort of political bit. That the thing that I find quite difficult at the moment is there seems to be what I call a militant liberalism. The idea that unless you are completely liberal in all of you, not just in your actions, but also in your thoughts, then there's something wrong with you. And it's an extreme contradiction to me, because to me liberalism is about accepting people for who they are, good and bad and whatever, but there is this sort of rejection of people who don't hold completely liberal views. And I think, well, the whole point of being liberal is that actually you do accept people, and this rejection, and I think it does help to explain some of the rise of some of the populist politicians who will remain nameless, because I think that people, they're being told that they should, if they have certain thoughts in a certain way, then they're a bad person and we shouldn't do this. And they're saying, well, I wouldn't act on it, but I have these thoughts. And so I don't identify with that group. And there might be this person who's pretty unpleasant in a little way, but at least he recognizes that, you know, I can have these thoughts. And so they gravitate towards these populist politicians. And, you know, and I think that's it's a real danger, this sort of lack of tolerance. Again, at the risk of this is going to be one of the more controversial podcasts. I was at the human animal bond meeting at Purdue, and I sort of Maggie O'Hare, who I have enormous respect for, and she dropped me an email, and she had her pronouns afterwards, and I'd just been chatting actually to a friend who told me a story that really resonated with me about this idea, because the idea of having pronouns after your name. And I don't know why I dropped this on poor Maggie. You must think, God, that guy.
Oh no, this was probably university policy.
But
it's increasingly university.
Yeah,
policy.
And you know, there are mutterings about it coming in, and some of my colleagues use it, and I was told this story, and I told it to Maggie as well, that I appreciate the sentiment. What I don't like is the idea that it might be forced upon us. I don't mind if somebody uses the wrong pronoun with me. And to me, it's more important to allow that, you know, there is nothing wrong with somebody making a mistake. And if it's pointed out, you put it right. But this idea that everybody has to put out their pronouns out there in order so that somebody won't be offended because of this or that, yeah, I have a problem with that. And the reason being is that the friend told me the story about somebody who was transgender but wasn't sure. And this policy had been put in place that you had to declare your pronouns. So they felt forced to make a decision about their sexuality, you know, at a time when they didn't want to. And actually, the benefit of the pronouns is more about, I'm just concerned that the use of pronouns is more about appeasing people who want to be recognized than actually helping the most vulnerable. And I know that might be extremely controversial and upset people. And I'm not transphobic or anything like that, you know, and I will accept anybody for that. But this idea that when it's not giving people the choice, you know, and if somebody used the wrong gender for me, I got run over actually when I was a kid, and I had quite long hair. I was 11 or 12, and I arrived in the hospital and said, "Oh, isn't she cute?" I said, "It's a he, actually." And maybe it didn't leave a mark on me, the fact that I still remember it. You know, 45 years later, and I still remember. But no, I wasn't that offended. But, you know, people are sort of, you shouldn't make a mistake. Well, why not? There's nothing wrong with making a mistake. It's okay to forgive people, put them right. You know, if I tell you a joke and you find it offensive and you say, I don't find that sort of stuff funny, okay, sorry, I won't make those jokes with you. Rather than nobody should tell these jokes.
Right.
That's censorship. And again, that also I find quite difficult. I don't know how the hell we've got onto this, by the way. But so the other one of my friends at vet school, who actually is now a professor of bioethics in Baltimore in the States. He went from being a vet to a philosopher. And he's a good friend of mine. But I remember him sort of saying, well, he used to get eaten. And you're saying about sort of some of the more extreme people aren't enjoying. He used to get eaten up by the fact, thinking, you know, there but for the grace of God, I was not born in Germany in the 1930s, because I don't know how I would have behaved in that situation. I'm thinking, but you weren't, so don't worry about it. But, you know, these are things that he, and, you know, I don't think any of us, and it's very easy to sit on the outside and say, well, you know, that was terrible, what happened? Well, I think we've got quite a recent example in North America, haven't we, of somebody who can just incite and potentially the
we do.
But one of the things I remember saying to him early on is, you know, because because he's a philosopher and logical, I said, why do you have to assume that we have to be logically consistent?
Right.
Isn't it in the human nature to be logically inconsistent? And I think that's what you were saying as well, that actually, yeah, you can't be morally totally consistent, pretty much. It's extremely hard. It's where you make those compromises.
Well, the thing that's exactly right. And one of the things that I've got to be in my bonnet about now is so the philosopher who has influenced me the most is Peter Singer, and the one I just have enormous respect for Peter Singer. The guy just won $1 million prize. He's giving every penny of it away. He's giving 25% to animals. He's giving 50% to animal-related causes, 50% I think to world hunger causes, and I think 50% to the effective altruism movement. So he's giving away $1 million. This guy just doesn't talk. He actually lives the life. But I recently saw a piece that he wrote recently, or it was an interview or something like that. And the question was, let's say you're at Christmas dinner, your Thanksgiving dinner. Thanksgiving in the United States is coming up, and you're at the family, and you're a vegetarian or a vegan, and you're there with your family, and they bring the turkey out, and the question is, should you compromise a little bit and eat a little turkey, and not make a big deal? And he says yes. He says go for it.
Wow,
he says he wrote a book called Practical Ethics, and he says absolutely go for it. And when Joan Dunnier argued that the real deaths in the United States at 9/11 was the deaths of 30 million chickens that died that day, Peter Singer said no. He said the greater tragedy was the deaths of 3,000 people that day. So this is a person that lives that lives in the real world, and he's sort of willing to say, like, consistency gets you consistency's good, but there comes a point at which you need to to live a decent life, you need to make some compromises.
Wow, that's probably a good point at which to stop. The one thing I must tell you, just sort of that may or may not make you laugh. I was reading some of the reviews of the book, and one of them, and I will have to say, and it was said, one of the reviews said it puts you in the same category as Malcolm Gladwell and Michael Lewis. Now, Malcolm Gladwell, tipping point, and then I thought, who the hell is Michael Lewis? I don't think to me that's not a compliment. You're in the same league as this person I've never heard of.
He's a famous guy.
I discovered that he's apparently a famous financial journalist, but I'd never heard of him. And probably that just reflects my ignorance. But I would put you above Michael Lewis, because
my favorite review of the book is on Amazon, and it was a person that gave it a 1-star review. And I actually use it when I give talks sometimes. And he says, it was very good. And what the guy says is, Herzog's book is only interesting for people who, like to wander, like to ask questions about things that the answers are obvious or something like that. And then he said something which I thought was, which I of course sort of disagree with that. But then he said, like, just because you can't. Something like, just because you can't live the perfect life doesn't mean you shouldn't try. And I thought, the guy was, I like that. I thought he was right. And I thought that,
But I do think you're a better person for being aware of what the issues are. And I think that's,
I think that's right.
And that to me is what I like about the book. And
yeah, and I think you never know if books are successful or not. When I was teaching, my goal as a faculty member, as a teacher, was not to just fill kids' heads full of knowledge, because they were going to forget all that stuff, but to make them leave class with enough questions in their head that they would talk about it to their friends at lunch afterward. You know?
Well,
And so I thought my job was really just try and screw people's heads up as a faculty member. And that was my goal in writing the book. You know, when I was writing a book, I did not write this book for people like you. I wrote it for people that were getting ready to get on an airplane and had a boring airplane ride, and they just wanted something to read. I wanted something for the average person that was interested in a good read. And in that regard, what my goal was to do was to like getting people to ask themselves these questions and doing it in a way that would be sort of fun, but yet still ask serious questions and provoke people to think a little differently.
That was the thing also for me, that when I was at vet school, when I got to the third year, we had pharmacology, parasitology, pathology, and microbiology. And I'd come out of a pharmacology lecture, 50 minutes, 12 sides of A4, drugs, dosages, side effects, go and learn it. And I nearly left vet school. I found it, I found it painful. And I had some friends who were doing things like psychology, and I decided that I'd go to one of their lectures. And I came out with one side of A4 with some ideas. And I thought, interesting. Wow, this is what, this involves thinking, unlike the vet course. And I think that was the sort of, again, one of the big transition points for me. And I think you're right. A good teacher teaches people to think, not gives, And nowadays, we've got Google, so you don't need to fill your head full of facts. Right. It should free up your head.
Yeah, the facts are changing. The facts are changing so quickly.
Yeah.
That's
and so we should be able to free up people's minds so that they can think more. Mm-hmm. The difficulty we've got is with social media, people are just putting themselves in these echo chambers, as you say, and you need to listen to both Fox News and CNN. And Simon Gadbois, he said one of the things that his father ingrained in him was, if you feel strongly about something, go and investigate it and find out all the evidence you can. That's your thesis. Then go off and investigate the opposite point of view with just as much passion. That's your antithesis. And the truth is somewhere in between. And I just thought, and I just think that's what people need to know. And as you say, people want things to be binary. But in biology, everything is in shades of gray.
That's correct.
And that's what kids need to appreciate. But people are being told it is one way. And I guess it goes back to what we were saying earlier, or I was saying earlier, that there's too much of this sort of dumbing down to make things very simple. When actually, as I said, I think we're in a great time when we can free our heads and think more about these issues, and we'll make our choices, and we live and die by them, and not think that we have to do everything that we can. It reminds me of, again, the story, one of the stories you tell in there about the guy with the bugs, and if a fly comes into his house.
Oh, Michael Mountain, yeah.
Oh, was it Michael Mountain? Okay, so so if a fly comes into his house, he takes it out because it's captive. Whereas if it's outside, he's allowed to swat it. And that's an interesting view. And, you've got to respond.
One of the things that surprised me about the book is that it has been received generally pretty well by animal protectionists and animal rights activists. And even though I'm not a fellow traveler, I think they appreciate that my goal is to actually get people to think about the issues, which is of course what they argue is the more people think about the issues, the more they're going to realize that there's some important ethical things going on that they need to be thinking about, which actually sort of
and if people cut down their meat consumption by 10%, that's a good thing.
I agree with that.
And you shouldn't just sort of say, well, you've got to cut it out 100%, and and I think that's the danger then. It is a great read. As I said, I recommend it to anybody who, as I said, just wants to think a little bit more. And as I say, we make our own decisions and sort of live and die by them. But we justify what we do, and not think that we have to be perfect in anything. So, wow, that was quite a That was great. I really enjoyed it. You said you wanted to ask me something. You sort of started to ask me. I didn't know if you did ask
No,
me.
I did. No, you answered my question. No, I said what I wanted to ask you about was, veterinarians. I imagine okay, you have some people that come into your office because all their dog or cat needs or whatever needs is just a checkup and some shots and stuff like that. But otherwise, they're coming in there because they got problems. Either got behavior problems, or they've got medical problems, or their pet needs to get euthanized. And so what veterinarians are seeing is day after day after day, I would think, is problems that people are having with animals. In other words, it's like, and it's interesting. It's like, because with the pet products industry, the picture they portray of the human animal bond is it's all sweetness and light. But yet, if you're a practicing veterinarian, it's not like that, right?
So I'm gonna finish this on a little tease. Okay. We've just finished some work looking at the effects of pet ownership on veterinarians and people who work at veterinary clinics, and the benefits or not that it doesn't have. And I'm going to end the conversation here. I will tell you the answers of it, because just let people know it's a very different story for the vets. The vets who have pets, what they get out of their pets is quite different to what's commonly reported for other people. And our question was, do they get the same benefits, or perhaps does having Fido at home remind them of Fido in the clinic that they have to put to sleep?
Wow, great question.
So thank you so much for a lovely evening. I've had a great chat.
Yeah, tease. Okay, I'm looking forward to that paper.
And
seeing that one.
We'll catch up again soon. And as I said, if that's teased other people, then look out for the paper. We're in the process of submitting it at the moment. It'll be out soon. So Thanks a lot, and thanks for listening.
Well, thanks for having me on the podcast. It was really fun talking to you.